Hello! I reviewed Gen 1. I reviewed Gen 2. It is now time to look at Gen number 3. Generation 3 of Pokemon was an extremely exciting time. Pokemon was technically supposed to end after Generation 2, and so when Generation 3 was announced, it was a huge surprise. Nowadays, it feels like they're always coming out with Pokemon generations, and it's just kind of never ending. But at that point, it really had seemed like the games part of the franchise had ended. While some people complained about Generation 3, too much water, overall, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald were amazing games. In case you haven't watched the other videos in the series, I'm going to be going through every single Pokemon in Generation 3 and telling you my thoughts about it. Remember, these are my opinions, they're not facts, so if you disagree, feel free to tell me in the comments. First up is Treecko. I have started with all 3 of the Hoenn starters at different points in different adventures. Treecko is a really fun Pokemon to start with. In fact, it might be my favorite grass starter. Not only does it have a really interesting and good design, but it's actually really good. Grovyle is also really cool. Of the starters, it's probably the coolest middle stage in this generation. Sceptile is amazing. I'm very partial to dinosaurs, and Sceptile just looks like this really super fast, awesome dinosaur monster. Torchic is adorable and is definitely the Pokemon in this generation that I have started with the most. Combusken though, I don't really like that much. I always felt like it would grow on me and then I would start liking it. Whatever's going on with its legs and its hips, just really weird. Blaziken is super cool, really strong, that speed boost ability though. I had one in my super duper competitive team for Pokemon Alpha Sapphire and it wrecked a lot of faces. Mudkip is adorable and probably one of the most popular starters of all time. Marshtomp gains the ground typing, which was extremely good for a starter. It was the first time a water type starter had a dual typing. Swampert was an incredibly useful Pokemon in this generation because of how much water there was. It allowed you to actually get where you needed to go. Poochyena, I feel like, is the weird next stage of like Growlithe to Houndour. Like, you've got Growlithe, who's just a fire type, and then you have Houndour, who is all like fire and dark, and then Poochyena becomes just dark. And honestly, it's just not as cool as the other two. Mightyena is a little bit better than Poochyena, especially with the Intimidate ability. I still don't really like it. Zigzagoon is cute and fluffy, and I want to hug it, but it's not very good. Linoone is cool only because its eyes are like super bright blue. I feel like if it didn't have that part of its design, it would be kind of boring. Wurmple is just okay, but the fact that it can evolve into either Silcoon or Cascoon is pretty cool. I don't like though how random it is which one it evolves into. Of the final stages of Wurmple, Beautifly is prettier but more boring. Overall, I think I prefer Dustox. Lotad is just okay to me, but I get the concept, so I'm like, nah. Lombre I feel like is like a weird middle stage because it goes from Lotad to Ludicolo, and I feel like it's just like this kind of like half duck, half plant. I don't know if it really works, but Ludicolo, you can never forget Myra B's Ludicolos. Seedot is slightly more interesting than Lotad just because it can learn the move Bide. I personally hadn't interacted with the move Bide very much before Seedot, and it was kind of a shock when suddenly it attacked and I was like, oh, that hurt. Nuzleaf is slightly less awkward than Lombre, but still pretty awkward. But Ludicolo is cooler than Shiftry to me. Although Shiftry kind of does look like an Ent, and I am a big Lord of the Rings fan. Taillow is a very cool regional bird. This is the first time any of the regional birds had an actual kind of color palette to them. The other ones were very bland, and Taillow definitely stands out. Swellow was pretty good, and it was a useful flying type if you needed the HM Fly. Wingle's weakness to electricity is a big problem. I didn't realize that when I was a kid. I had it on my team quite a bit. Palipare, on the other hand, is often used as a rain setter in doubles, and is actually not that bad, even though, yeah, super weak to electricity. Routes is one of the coolest and probably most impactful Pokemon of this generation. It is very well loved, including by yours truly. I like how Curlia kind of looks like a little ballerina. I felt like that was a good evolution from Routes. Gardevoir is just this beautiful, majestic Pokemon, and having Wally use it against you at the very end was very cool. Surskit is really cute, and the bug water typing had never been used up until this point, but Masquerain was kind of a disappointment, and it was another Pokemon where I was hoping that it would be stronger, and then it wasn't. Shroomish is the perfect little grumpy mushroom baby, and I love it. Breloom has definitely been my most used grass type when playing through Gen 3. The grass fighting combination was really fun. Slackoth was never one of my favorite Pokemon, although its mechanic is definitely interesting. Vigoroth always seemed like the most powerful form of this line because it didn't have the Truant ability, but then you look at Slacking's attack and skill swap and you get scared. Very scared. When I first saw Nincada, I thought it was gonna evolve into something super duper cool, and then when it evolved into Ninjask, I was a little bit disappointed that it wasn't as strong as I thought it would be. Shedinja was a Pokemon that was always hard to get. When I got it for the first time, I was like, whoa! And then I looked at its HP and was super confused and decided I didn't want one of those on my team, even though I had worked so hard to get it. Whismur always kind of felt like Jigglypuff, but instead of doing the singing part, it skipped just straight to being really mad and yelling. Loudred didn't feel like a Pokemon to me the first time I saw it, but now I don't mind it as much. Exploud is very ugly and very annoying. Don't really like it. Makuhita is really cute and funny, and I just like that it's this little Pillsbury doughboy who punches really hard. The first time I saw Hariyama's design, I didn't really like it, but it definitely grew on me over time. Azurill is just a super cute baby version of Meryl, and I was super excited when I saw one for the first time. I didn't know that that was gonna be a thing, and then I saw baby Meryl, and I was just like, oh! Nosepass I definitely didn't like in this generation because it's like a giant nose. But this is a Pokemon that has grown on me through Pokemon Go and when it evolves in another generation. Skitty is super cute and pink and I love it. I had a Delcatty on my first team in Pokemon Sapphire back in the day, even when I was going to the Elite Four, and it could not hold its own because it's a cute cat and it's just so cute. Sableye was always a Pokemon that looked really cool but wasn't super useful, but since then they've made some really cool changes to how he plays, and he's a much better Pokemon because of it. Mawile is super cool, and I'm really glad they gave this Pokemon more attention with Mega. Aron was the first Steel-type Pokemon that you could get early in a game, so I definitely had one on my team a couple times just because it was so cool and interesting to have that strong defensive type on your team right from the very beginning. I managed to catch a shiny Lairon in Pokemon Go, and the red eyes are super cool. Aggron kind of looks like Metal Rhydon, and yes, I like it. Meditite is not my favorite. I prefer the more like hyper fighting type Pokemon. Same thing with Medicham, like I get it's psychic and fighting, so it's supposed to be kind of zen. I prefer my fighting types kind of like jumping around and more energetic. I liked Electrike a lot when I first got one, and I still really do in a gameplay mechanics type of way, but I don't really know what's going on with its head. It's one of those things that once you see it, you're like, wait, how, wouldn't that hurt its neck? I don't really get it. Okay, moving on. Manectric doesn't really have the same issue as Electrike. It's just pure awesome. Plusle and then Minun, I feel like were just designed to showcase the double battle mechanics, and they're just not good at all. I was pretty disappointed that they couldn't evolve, to be honest. Volbeat is another double battles Pokemon, again just showcasing mechanics. Illumise, same thing, it's Volbeat's counterpart. I actually used Roselia quite a bit on my different runs through Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Even before it had an evolution, it was actually pretty good. Gulpin has just never been a Pokemon I really liked. Same thing with Swalot. I don't know if it's its color scheme or what's going on with its face, but Piranha was a really interesting take on a Piranha Pokemon. I don't understand how a Piranha evolves into a shark, but Sharpedo was a really cool Pokemon and really scary, especially with its Intimidate ability. Wailmer is hilarious, like this giant whale that's goofy and smiling. Yes. And then Wailord is like the king of memes in Pokemon. I have a hard time imagining a trainer taking a Wailord around to different places and actually battling with it because it's just too big to fit in most places. Like it would definitely blow out the walls of buildings. Like it'd be like the Kool-Aid Man of Pokemon. Seems like a bad idea to have one around. Numel was always really funny to me because it's just this really slow camel. And Camerupt wasn't half bad either, but let's be real, I mostly use Blazekins, so although I definitely did have one on my team in a run through at least once. I feel like Torkoal had so much potential and it just didn't live up to it. Although Flannery's Torkoal was pretty scary. I feel so bad for Spoink because it can't stop bouncing or it will die. Yeah, that's what its Pokédex entry says. I do really like Shiny Grumpig though. The yellow color works really well. Spinda's whole thing is that every single one of its species is unique because their spots are in slightly different places. I was a very rebellious teenager and decided that I would try and disprove prove that. Had a lot of spin does. Didn't work. There is a soft spot in my heart for Trapinch. I feel like it's so cute and derpy. Maybe that's not the most popular opinion. I'm not 100% sure, but I really like Trapinch. But Brava is a super cool Pokemon on its own. But then you get to Flygon, and man, why didn't this Pokemon get a Mega or a Gigantamax or something? Because it's such a cool Pokemon. Cacnea's pretty cute. I like how in Pokemon Go and some of the later games, it kind of like swings its arms in its animations. I think the animations definitely help this Pokemon a lot. Cacturne is also just okay. I think the dark typing is definitely interesting as opposed to the poison typing and kind of sets it apart from a lot of the other grass types. Swablu is super cute, and then when it evolves, it becomes a dragon. Like, what? It doesn't really look like a dragon, so it doesn't entirely make sense. Like, it's really just a big giant cloud bird. Most of my memories of Seviper come from the Battle Pike in Pokemon Emerald, where you literally have to walk into the mouth of this Seviper building thing. I feel like Zangoose has a cooler design than Seviper, but they did more with Seviper than Zangoose. I don't really like Lunatone that much. Same thing with Solrock, and I always felt it was weird that Solrock didn't have the fire type, but it's technically just a rock. Barboach was always really boring to me. You get him too late in the game for him to really feel like a Pokemon that you'd want to add to your team, and with his typing, he just kind of feels like a discounted version of Mudkip. Whiscash is really funny looking, but not my favorite. I feel like Corphish looks a little bit too much like Krabby. Crawdaunt at least gets the dark typing and looks a little bit more different, but still just not super interesting to me. Baltoy is just kind of boring to me. So is Claydol. For me, the redeeming factor of these guys is that sometimes you'll catch them and they're holding light clay, which is a very good item. Laleep was a really interesting fossil because it was the first time we actually had like a plant fossil instead of just like an animal. And I was always confused looking at Cradilly, like I didn't know where its eyes were, and I feel like that's intentional, like it's intentionally unnerving. My brother mostly played Ruby. He had an Anorith on his team that evolved into Armaldo. When he finally trained that Armaldo up to be like really good, it was the first time that he was ever able to actually beat me in battle. So I have a lot of respect for Armaldo. Feebas is super interesting because it's so hard to get. In every generation, they always make some sort of weird like challenge to get this Pokemon. And then to evolve it is also difficult because you have to convince it that it's beautiful. And it's this fish that doesn't really look beautiful at the time. Once you convince it that it's beautiful, it evolves into Melodic, and Melodic is actually beautiful. And Melodic's ability, competitive, is so cool because it's like, if you try to bring me down, I only get stronger. I actually have been considering for many years now of getting a Melodic tattoo. I think that if I do ever get a tattoo, that's probably what it's gonna be. It just might be my favorite Pokemon of all time. Passform is just really there to showcase the weather mechanics. I don't really like it that much. It's kind of boring. I like the way they work Kecleon into the story, but its ability isn't all that practical in battle. Shuppet is definitely less creepy than Duskull, but still, like, I would not want to run into one of these. And Bandit is also very creepy because it's kind of supposed to be like a possessed doll. There are horror movies made out of that. I would not want to run into one of those, especially at night. Dusclops is also very creepy, but even bigger, so more creepy. I always wish that Tropius would be better than it was because it's a dinosaur and I love dinosaurs, but it's just not that good. Chimecho is a really rare Pokemon and it has interesting lore, but it wasn't very good. Absol is super cool, like, whoa. And then they added a Mega for Absol, which was such a good idea because I think a lot of people really like this Pokemon. I did find Mirage Island one time and catch a bunch of Wynots, and it was really weird and cool. I used to think that Snorunt was kind of boring. This is another Pokemon where the animations really made it more interesting because it's always just shaking in this little coat type thing. That just makes it way more adorable. I want to go give it a hug and warm it up. But Glalie just looks like an ice face. I get that it's actually not that bad of a Pokemon, and some people have used it competitively, but it's definitely not my thing. Steel was definitely my late game preferred water type because that water ice dual typing was very good and it learned some pretty powerful moves. It was also pretty tanky and pretty cute. Celio just feels like a natural middle stage between Spheal and Wilrian. And Wilrian just looks like a giant walrus. Do not mess with the walrus. Clamperl is another Pokemon that I thought would evolve and be really cool, especially because you find it by diving, which was a new feature in this game, but its evolutions just aren't very good. Huntail was really ugly and just didn't have a lot going for it. Gorbius went for more of the beautiful route and just not, no. Relicanth is this weird ancient rock fish that ends up being surprisingly important when it comes to the Reggies. Love Disc was just kind of there to get heart scales. That's about it. I didn't really like Bagon that much when I first played through these games, and I think that's mostly because I liked Larvitar so much, and in comparison, I just, I still think Larvitar is cooler. I'm also not a huge fan of Shelgon. I feel like they kind of did this before with Pupitar back in Gen 2, except now it's got 4 legs instead. It's just the big shell. It literally has shell in its name. But for all that, Salamence, super cool. Like, suddenly you got this big dragon, and he really made Bagon and Shelgon worth it. Beldum was a really interesting Pokemon because you could not get it during the game. You could only get it after as a gift, so it made it really mysterious. Metang I don't really like though, because it just feels like a mini Metagross. But Metagross though. Steven's Metagross is like an iconic figure in Pokemon. It's incredibly powerful. The Psychic Steel typing, it's just so good. It's both defensive and offensive at the same time, so very cool and very good Pokemon. Okay, I gotta talk about the Reggies in general first before I talk about each one. The puzzles to find the Reggies were a really interesting feature of Generation 3. I actually still remember a little bit of Braille because of these games. That being said, I'm not a huge fan of their designs. I am a big fan of their concept. I feel like it could have been executed in a bit of a cooler way. Regirock is kind of this big stone golem rock formation thing. Regice is a giant ice cube, and then Registeel, granted, is probably the most interesting of the 3. Latias is a really cheerful legendary. Latios is a really cool legendary. Kyogre was such an interesting legendary Pokemon. The idea that this monster actually made all of the seas, and then it's always fighting with Groudon over if there should be more sea or more land. Groudon is also very cool, but because I played Sapphire more, I have more of an attachment to Kyogre. Rayquaza is one of the strongest Pokemon that has ever existed, especially in its mega form. You get to ride Rayquaza into space. Like, that is cool. Jirachi I actually got to have on one of my teams from a really early level because you could import it using a GameCube. It was really fun to have a legendary like that on my team from the start and to play through with it almost like it was my starter. Deoxys is super scary, and its background And that's all the Pokemon in Gen 3. Overall, I think that this was a really good generation. There were a lot of interesting Pokemon. They played with different types, and the mechanics that they added in this generation, for the most part, made the Pokemon more interesting. Next week, I'm going to be making a video on a slightly different topic, but then the week after that, I'm going to be returning for generation number 4. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you leave a like and you subscribe so that you can see the other generations. Bye!